Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, I'm Angie, I'm an addict.
Hi, Angie.
I think I was saying just earlier that I hadn't even gave a thought to doing this chair today, and now I'm sat here thinking, shit, why didn't I give a thought to doing this chair today? And as he was doing the reading, I was thinking, because next month I celebrate 14 years clean, which is amazing. Yeah? But the first time I did a step 4 that wasn't in a treatment centre, I did it at this book, at the working guide, and I think that's the step the step 4 that I did that I want to share on, because my experience of it was so thorough, you know, that it allowed me to really take a deeper look in a way that previous step 4s hadn't done, and because of that it kind of still held sway when I did step 4s afterwards as well, you know. But at the same time, I'm thinking, shit, that was about 12 years ago though. Can I even remember what that was like and some of the, you know, stuff that was in that? But I guess, first of all, you know, when I came into this programme, I got a sponsor very quickly. I was about 3 months clean. I got a sponsor and I started working the steps, you know, and in that first year I'd done step 1, 2 and 3, you know, and I would say they were thorough. You know, I've never picked up since, so that told me that I have a step 1, that I know that I don't have to use, that I don't have to do it alone, and that I can hand this over and have faith that I'm going to be all right. And that is the basis of being able to go into doing a step 4 for me. You know, I can only talk about my experience, and people might have different experiences. But so I got to about a year clean, and I think someone said, you know, like when you go to meetings and every meeting is they're reading step 4 or someone's sharing on step 4, and you know. And all I heard when I was a year clean was what a bastard step 4 was, and that everybody relapses on it. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. You know, I'm not comfortable with that. And I'd started some therapy at the same time, and my sponsor was away for the 6 weeks of the summer. And so she'd said to me, well, perhaps while I'm away, she said, just sit in the 3 and do the work that you're doing with your therapist, and when I come back, we can start step 4. And I kind of interpreted that as, do you know what, chill out, take it easy, don't worry about step 4. And all of a sudden a year has passed and I haven't picked it up. And it's been a fucker of a year, to be fair. And certainly when I got to about 18 months clean, I reached a point in my recovery where, because whilst I was willing and I was doing all the suggestions, you know, had the sponsor, working the steps, going to meetings, being of service, sharing, blah, 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 I would do it my way a little bit, you know. I was one of these addicts that would phone up my sponsor after I'd done something to tell her what I did, you know. And I was very good at phoning her at 7:35 on a Tuesday night when I knew she was secretary in the meeting, so I could say I'd rung her, you know. So it was like I was doing it, but within my kind of, yeah. This is my first time in recovery, yeah. And my experience in those early years was, this ain't easy, yeah. For me, it brought up all sorts of shame, devastation, trauma, just the shit show that my using had been, you know, decades of just destroying everything that I came in contact with, and being clean and one of my biggest defences was that I'm alright, I'm sweet, innit? I don't give a fuck. And I'd stagger and strut around meetings like I was the loudest, hilarious person because I was alright. But actually I wasn't. I was really struggling, I was really unsure. I was in a lot of pain, in a lot of trauma, and I was repeating core messages over and over in my acting out in my early recovery until I reached the point where I always remember, and I went and done a chair on a Friday night meeting. I said, "You're all a bunch of cunts and I didn't need you." And I walked off and I met a dealer, because I couldn't get honest. I couldn't say this is really difficult and I don't know what I'm doing and I need help. And something happened that night and my higher power came with me to meet that dealer. And I don't know about for any of you, but if you're an addict like me and you've got money in your pocket and you've decided you're going to use and the dealer's there and the drugs are there, to walk away and not use is an actual miracle, and I experienced that miracle. And I knew, because I'd been about to go back to a crack house with a beggar, in a squat, and I was planning on, because I got fucked up veins, and I was thinking, all right, just stick a whole lot in the needle one time, jobs are good and done, I'd reached that point in my recovery where I wanted to die because I didn't know how to live. And in my addiction, I never wanted to die. I just wanted oblivion, and that's the difference, So I get to this point and I've walked away from the dealer and I thought, I need to do something different, And I went back to the rooms and I started to get really honest, really vulnerable and share what was really going on and how I was struggling and I started to really feel safe again in NA because I hadn't felt safe. I hadn't felt safe in my recovery with what I was experiencing, And part of that was my reason for avoiding this step 4. Because my life was a shit show. I didn't want to look at it, I didn't want to see it, I didn't want to tell anyone about it, But what pushed me finally, was I went to a women's meeting and there's about 30 women in this meeting. It's an amazing meeting, really strong. And the secretary asked for all those women that were available for sponsorship to raise their hand. And there wasn't a single woman raised their hand in that room. And I thought, shit, that's really sad, And the reason being is that those that had clean time had half a dozen sponsees. They were full up. And then there were others, like me, that thought that I could sit back, put my feet up, back away from doing any work, and that everybody else would do it. And I suddenly realised that I had a responsibility, if I was an NA member, that I needed to get my shit together, do my work, so that I could raise my hand and be available to sponsor someone else. And that was the real motivator for me to actually face step 4. And do you know what? I really sold myself off when I listened to the propaganda in the meetings around it, because my experience was that actually step 4 is one of the most beautiful, loving, healing steps that I've ever, especially that first one, it's where the change happens, it's where the healing comes for me and where the growth and the repair begins, I don't know if I'll do it justice when I try to share this with you, but I'm going to try anyway, See, what I came to it, my sponsor had me, like I say, answering all those questions, and looking, and I can't even remember off the top of my head what those questions were, and it's insane because I regularly do step 4s with sponsees as well, but it's all right that I don't remember, what I do remember is when we came to write in that inventory, and she said to me, what I want you to do, she said, is I want you to draw a table with this inventory. She said, and I want you to list the person, the resentment, the feeling, and the belief. And I didn't understand what she meant to start with, and she gave me a really nice example, and I've always used it because it's better than any of my own examples when I'm trying to explain it to sponsees and that. And so she told me that she had a resentment with her dad, you know, and the resentment was that when she was younger, that he took her sister out and she was left behind. And so the feeling was envy, jealousy, rejection, and the belief was that he loved her sister more than her. And it made me realise that actually that belief part of it is quite important, you know. And as I started writing my inventory, what I come to understand, you know, is that a lot of the times the beliefs were repeating, you know, and it didn't take me long to start to see a pattern in my resentments, because most of my resentments were triggered by the belief that I held, you know. And so for me, getting really honest, not just with my sponsor, but with myself in this, to understand what these core beliefs were that I had, you know. What I came to understand is, you know, that I don't know about anyone else, you know, we don't have to have all had stories or pasts or, you know, but for myself, I came from a really damaged childhood, yeah, and as a little girl, I wasn't safe, you know, and I had adapted and learnt ways to keep myself safe, and they were my behaviours, you know. And they helped me survive, they helped me get through on the streets, through my addiction, through all that shit show. You know, those behaviours had been real strong defences, but actually now I was clean. And certainly that first 2 years in recovery, they were damaging me. They were really harming me, and they were reinforcing my core beliefs, you know. And somewhere as a little girl, I'd come to this belief that I was actually rotten to the core, that I was destructive, that I was damaged, and that I deserved to be punished, and that everything I did was wrong, you know. And that's a really shit way to think of any little girl feeling about herself, but that was my truth, you know. And so any time anyone did anything that triggered those beliefs, you know, that made me feel that I wasn't good enough, or that what I did is wrong, what I say is wrong. I might say the wrong step 4 chair to you today, and, you know, it's like it's so ingrained in every single thing I do, you know, and it's really harming. And so the answer to that for me was about carrying on, you know. I mean, you talk about 4, this is the step, but it's also connected to the 5 and the 6 and the 7, you know, and the defects and the change and the understanding those behaviours and why they were there, what purpose they had, how they're harming me now, and what do I replace them with, you know? What are my assets? What are the behaviours that, what can I do when I'm triggered into those core beliefs to act in the same way that I've done over and over and over. And why this is so good is because it looks at the relationships, you know, and it's like I hadn't been able to have relationships, you know. I'd been with my daughter's father for 23 years in addiction, unable to have a relationship. And I'd never understood, you know, this thing used to keep repeating with us. And I'd be going about my day, having a great day in my mind, you know, and he'd come in and say something, ultimately he'd come in and I'd be triggered and I would be reactive. And as far as I was aware, I hadn't even changed. I hadn't said or done anything, and all of a sudden I'm being attacked. But actually what I see in my recovery, what I see, like when I was in meetings on like committees or, attending areas or, is that I'm very controlling. I'm very aggressive. I have this do it my way. Do it my way or I'll do you kind of attitude, And I was one of these NA Nazis, If you was on the committee with me, God help you, And I have a lot of, for those people that might not have survived that, and gone out or left the meeting, and because that's true, I was destructive in that controlling behaviour. And because what that was ruled by was fear. Fear that if anything changes, I might relapse. Fear that if you get to know me, I might not be good enough. If you get to know me, you might reject me. If you get to know me, you might see who I really am, And I don't know but one thing I learned is that I have this habit of justifying every single thing that I do, And my husband might say to me, what's for dinner, love? And I'll say, well, so I'm going to do the chicken tonight. I know we were going to have shepherd's pie, but the thing is, if I do the chicken tonight, well, it'll be better on Friday because the shepherd's pie will be quicker to make. And I'll go into this big long story as to why I'm not cooking shepherd's pie and he's having chicken. And all he wants to know is what's for his fucking dinner. He don't give a shit. Just wants to know he's getting fed. But what it does is that, I started to see that I do that over and over in all different circumstances when I don't need to, because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I get it wrong, see, I don't know about anyone else, but actually despite all my controlling, dominating, really I could pretend to be so confident and, have this personality that you wouldn't know I was shook. And inside I'm terrified and I'm so seething with anxiety and and when I get like that, I almost feel transparent, and you can see right through me. And I don't know about for anyone else, but I am such a sensitive person that I can't hide my emotions, and acknowledged. It's written all over me, And if I cry, I get so angry with myself. I get angry if you acknowledge that I've cried, I remember someone meant to give me a tissue in the meeting once. I nearly took her head off. I'm like, who the fuck does this woman think she is? Just mind your business and leave me alone, Because I'm vulnerable, and I was scared to be vulnerable. And actually I've come to realise that my vulnerability is a strength, That my strength is being able to really connect and understand and acknowledge why I behave, when I behave, what I do. It says about that daily inventory that we take, And for me, I need to have that inventory, because as much as I want to be loving, compassionate, kind, this really great person, I quite often fall short, and I'll fall back into those defects. And so the great thing is, when that happens, they're like big highlighters to me that can actually say, what's going on? And I am able to stop and give myself a bit of grace and a bit of compassion instead of this really critical self that is what I've been defending against, that actually recognises, okay, so this has felt quite overwhelming at the moment, or this feels really, like, I've got a lot of anxiety around it, you know. And I've especially had to do that in these last few years of my recovery because, you know, I've gone into menopause, and menopause is like a whole fucking shit show of a world that, you know, you can't even begin to untangle. But for me, it was really centred around anxiety, you know, and fear, and just being so overwhelmed with myself that I had to start to recognise how I was behaving, to look after myself, to think about what it was that I needed to be able to... I didn't need defective behaviours to take care of myself now. I needed to nurture myself. I needed to recognise. I kind of see my vulnerable side, yeah, as or my trauma side, as this little toddler that I walk alongside on a daily basis, you know, and I hold her hand and I get her safely across the road, and, you know, and I nurture her and I can play with her and I can love her, and, you know, but she's a fucking toddler, so every now and again she will kick off and she will have a tantrum and go berserk, and that's usually when I've been triggered by something, you know. And so in the same way that I would with a toddler, I pick it up and I reassure it and I find out what it is that it needs so that I can take care of her, to put her down, to walk alongside me again. And that's what Step 4 has given me. That healing, that kind of like understanding and compassion of why life had been so hard, you know. I don't know if that's what came out, so, you know, that's what you got, but thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Ange.